Welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren, and we are live on Facebook/Voice of America, and we want your comments and questions. Now, freedom of the press is held dear by generations of Americans. It is guaranteed along with freedom of speech and freedom of religion by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Advocating for press freedom is a U.S. policy objective. And Thursday, May 3rd is World Press Freedom Day, and by all accounts, press freedom and journalists are under attack throughout the world. And nowhere is that attack more profound than Afghanistan. 10 journalists were killed in Afghanistan in the last 10 days. 9 of them murdered by, a suicide bomber who was posing as a journalist who had a camera in hand, falsely appearing to be covering an earlier suicide bombing near NATO headquarters in Kabul. When first responders and the journalist showed up at the scene of the first bombing, the killer, posing as a journalist, blew himself up and killed those journalists around him. Now, separately, a BBC journalist was shot dead in the Afghan city of Khost. It's near the Pakistan border. And this very recent carnage in Afghanistan brings the number of journalists already killed this year to 24. Last year, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 46 journalists were killed worldwide. And it isn't just the deaths. Last year, in 2017, 262 journalists were imprisoned. And as for those deaths just days ago of journalists in Afghanistan, ISIS is claiming responsibility. A total of 26 people were killed and 50 others were injured as well. To describe the dangers of reporting in Afghanistan, we're joined by Najib Sharifi of the Afghan Journalist Safety Committee, who is in our studio in Kabul. Thank you very much for joining us, Najib, and tell me, how much of a challenge is it for a journalist in Afghanistan right now?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a very significant challenge that's facing Afghan journalists because they're under constant threat and they're under constant violence. Last year, we lost 20 journalists in the country. And the year before, 2016, we lost 16 journalists. And it seems that the trend is continuing and even expanding because only in 1 week we lost 11 journalists in the country. And I suspect that if this trend continues, which seems very much likely, we are going to have a great number of journalists killed this year in Afghanistan.
Najib, there are different ways that journalists are killed. You can have the car accident where you're chasing off to go to see some story to report on. But this last week was particularly heinous in that the journalists were set up. The first bomb went off. The journalists naturally wanted to report for the world, tell the world what's going on, responded to the scene, only to have the second bomb, the suicide bomber, blow them up. It seems to me that the target on journalists, that ISIS at least, has escalated this target. Am I right? Have the dangers escalated for journalists?
Yeah, you're definitely right. The dangers have significantly escalated. And we have, apart from this heinous incident of violence, which was the bloodiest incident against journalists in the history of Afghanistan, we have been receiving pervasive levels of threats against journalists all over the country, particularly in the insecure provinces where there is extensive presence of the Taliban and ISIS and other terrorist groups. So we're extremely worried about the escalation of threats and violence, and because the danger is that we could easily lose press freedom and freedom of expression, which many consider as the biggest achievement of the country since 2001. Today, Afghanistan has got the most vibrant media in the entire region. Based on RSF ranking, Reporters Sans Frontières, which is based in Paris, Afghanistan is even ahead of India by 16 points, India being considered the largest democracy in the world. So I'm extremely worried about the escalation of violence and its greater implication on the media and press freedom, which is playing a fundamental role today in Afghanistan, both in terms of consolidating democracy, in terms of promoting better, good governance, human rights, women's rights, and so on.
Najib, as a result of this most recent violence, actually it's a mass murder of these journalists, are you hearing that journalists want to either quit the business in Afghanistan, or that foreign journalists who are there, foreign news services, that they are pulling out because of the intimidation and the real threat of death?
Well, despite the growing violence against journalists, what's extremely admirable about Afghan journalists and what's extremely unique about Afghan journalists is that this has not weakened and shaken their resolve in terms of pursuing this noble profession. I have met so many journalists since the incident took place in Kabul 2 days ago, and the first question I asked them is that, what are you going to do? What's your reaction? They tell me, and it creates so much inspiration to me, that this is not going to shaken their resolve. This is not going to undermine their determination. They're going to keep pursuing. They're going to keep working for this profession because they strongly believe in the role of media in the current juncture of history in Afghanistan.
I guess I suspect that now that everyone's realized this ruse, where everyone knows that journalists respond to bombings, to report, and that they're going to show up in a pack. I would suspect, at least I would have some hesitation wanting to show up at a bombing to report it, thinking that anyone among me could be posing as a suicide bomber as this happened. I mean, it would certainly inject a higher sense of fear in my own reporting, self-survival. It would worry me, because maybe I don't know the journalists in the pack, or maybe I've been lured there. I just can't see how this wouldn't at least have some chilling effect.
Well, it definitely has left, its effect in terms of expanding the fear in the minds of journalists. And we're currently deliberating and discussing with the government, with security institutions, as to what meaningful and effective measures could be taken to prevent from such incidents where a large number of journalists is killed or could be killed. However, I have to remind that this is not the first incident of violence and killing against journalists. In January 2016, we had another spectacular, heinous attack against a van carrying journalists working for Tolo TV, which is the biggest TV station in the country. And as a result of that attack, 7 employees of the station were killed and 21 of them were injured. Yes, did it create fear? It did create fear. But did it result in, those individuals leaving their jobs? No, it didn't. This is the part that is the most promising aspect of journalism today in Afghanistan. But we cannot negate the fact that perpetuation of such large-scale acts of violence is definitely going to have disastrous effects on the future of media and freedom of expression in the country.
Well, Najib, I tip my hat to you, and I think that you and the other journalists in Afghanistan are doing an incredible service to the rest of the world, because without the journalism, we wouldn't know what's going on there. But regrettably, it is exceedingly dangerous, not just in Afghanistan, but in other places of the world. But Najib, thank you for joining us, and again, I tip my hat to all those journalists. Thank you. Now, Freedom House is one organization that measures press freedom worldwide. Another organization dedicated to promoting press freedom is the Committee to Protect Journalists. It's independent, nonprofit, and non-governmental, defending the right of journalists to report the news without fear of reprisal, threats, intimidation, or even death. Courtney Raj is the Advocacy Director for the Committee to Protect Journalists, and she's here in the studio with me. Nice to see you, Courtney.
Nice to see you.
Courtney, just hear what happened with the journalists in Afghanistan. Of course, it's reported worldwide. Najib just telling us horrifying stories, but they're not unusual, are they?
Sadly, they're not unusual. Afghanistan has been a deadly place for journalists, especially since the American invasion in 2001. And this idea of attacking journalists who are going to cover a bombing or a suicide bombing is unfortunately also not new. We've seen it in Pakistan, we've seen it in Iraq. we've seen that suicide bombers have also targeted not only attacks, but also, for example, vigils where they know that journalists will be. So it's a particularly insidious form of murder.
It's not even just murder. There's a recent arrest in December of 2 Reuters reporters in Myanmar who were investigating mass graves of the Rohingya. And according to at least all the reports, is that the police tricked them, lured them into handing them secret documents and arrested for them. They're still in jail, these Reuters reporters in Myanmar. So it's also jailing.
Absolutely. Jailing has actually increased worldwide for the past 2 years. Last year, 262 journalists at least were behind bars during our most recent prison census. And we know that anti-state charges such as promoting terrorism, covering issues that the state doesn't like is being equated with journalism. And in Myanmar, it's particularly disturbing because not only did they arrest the Reuters journalists, but they've prevented access for foreign journalists to enter. And there was a case of much Rohingya content being removed from Facebook. So even citizen journalists and citizen reporters were unable to get information out of a country where the UN has said a textbook case of ethnic cleansing is occurring.
I find it's very disappointing with the U.S. media, which I'm obviously a member of, is that it seems to me that the U.S. media, the journalists, could do more to put a spotlight on what's happening to our brethren in places like, well, Kabul, obviously there's a mass murder, so everyone's paying attention to that, but the jailed journalists, whether it be in Egypt, Turkey, or in Myanmar, is that, I don't see a lot of American news spotlight on these. Is that a fair criticism?
I think it depends. We've seen a very interesting initiative, for example, the Daphne Project, which Daphne Caruana Galizia is a Maltese journalist who was murdered at the end of last year. She was covering corruption, and several news organizations have gotten together to investigate the stories that she was working on and send a signal to the Maltese officials that no, she's not going to be murdered with impunity. We're going to continue.
But how often do you see that in U.S. media? That's the problem. Look, I follow that story as well, but I have to dig for it. It's not like you turn on the news and you see it. And I realize that it can't be about this story all the time. But journalists are the ones who are bringing the news from the world, putting the spotlight on whether it's corruption or democracy or whatever. But are you really satisfied with the?
Absolutely, we think more can be done, and that's one reason why we are constantly putting out news alerts and statements about the latest attacks on journalists, making sure that reporters have an update. For example, if you're writing about a state visit by the president of Egypt, Turkey, or China, which were the 3 first state visits to President Trump under his administration, we believe that you should, as part of that reporting, perhaps consider including the number of journalists behind bars. Those are the 3 leading jailer of journalists. As far as we know, President Trump never brought that up, and that is unlike previous administrations. And I think the media has a very critical role to play in shining the spotlight. We know,
But you know how it could do it? It doesn't have to cost a dime. You can tweet about it. You could tweet hashtag Myanmar military, hashtag Reuters reporters. Or the thing that's so distressing is that social media is a very effective tool to put the spotlight on what's going on. And I just don't, if every single day, even American journalists tweeted about one terrible thing going on as we try to get news out around the world, I think it would have an effect.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think that we see one day a year when that happens, which is World Press Freedom Day, when we see an international attention, including in the American media. But I would love to see that every day. I think it would make a big difference because we know that leaders around the world feel pressure when the public spotlight is put on them, whether that's Egypt. We also know that local journalists are most often the ones who are being imprisoned and killed, and they're not getting the international spotlight that journalists affiliated with major media are.
Well, I follow CPJ on Twitter, and I learn a lot. I get the newsletter, and it's quite shocking what I have to get from you, and I don't get other places. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
After this break, we're going to take a short break. We're going to talk to VOA journalists about their fight for press freedom.
I'm Jim Malone, and I work the political beat. I cover what drives the political issues in the United States, what voters think, what drives the candidates, how public opinion shifts on one issue or another. It keeps you in touch with the American people and where they want the country to go. It's a great way to get a window on what's happening in the United States. I'm Jim Malone, and my beat is U.S. politics.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
My name is Eva Makan. I started working at VOA in 1998. We're originally from former Yugoslavia, so we moved to America right when the war started. In 91, when I came here, in class I would always spend a lot of time doodling with wall art, graffiti. It opened up the door to exploration for a teenager. But you can definitely come out and do a piece like this, or do a piece like this, and it would be recognized. And you also tell a story through it. I connect art with journalism because it's a story that changes. And it's not just a view, it's not just a personal perspective, it's a story. And it's a story to be told. And that's it.
Here at Voice of America, we have journalists from around the world, and they've all faced the challenges of working in places where there is little to no press freedom. Two VOA journalists and the general manager of a VOA affiliate join me now to tell you their experiences. Raman Bunari is a reporter and anchor for VOA's Diwa service, which broadcasts in the Pashtun language in the Pakistan region bordering Afghanistan. Miroslava Gangadze is chief of VOA's Ukrainian service. She is an award-winning journalist and who has been selected for the 2019 class at Harvard University's Nieman Foundation of Journalism. Miroslava will study propaganda and strategies to counter it in light of a new era of Russian disinformation. Leo Trecci is with Venezuelans for Information, a news website and YouTube channel about issues and news in neighboring Venezuela. It is affiliated with Voice of America. Welcome to all of you. And let me go first to you, Miroslava. What got you into journalism?
I was actually a law student, and when I met my husband, we started, it was 1991, and Ukraine just become independent. And we felt, and I felt, that this is something that I can do for the country and for myself to cover, to build something new. So journalism was something that I can take the freedom and use it for the society. So.
And of course, I know what happened, but the viewers don't. What happened to your husband?
In 10 years after that, in 2000, he was murdered. He was murdered by government police because we were covering a lot of corruption in Ukraine. And obviously, the president and the government didn't like it. And one day he disappeared, and 2 months later, we found that he was murdered by government police.
And that you left the country? I
left the country because I started a public campaign to find the truth, because we really didn't know what really happened. And I had to leave at fear for my life, and I had 2 small kids. And actually, that helped me to build a coalition, international coalition, to find perpetrators responsible for the murder. So now we have a partial justice. And actually, you had an interview with CPJ representative. I was able to build a coalition with CPJ, NUJ, National Union of Journalists of Great Britain, and we put together a special report. We put a lot of pressure on Ukrainian government. I went to European Court for Human Rights. I won the European Court for Human Rights. And that pushed the government to actually at least jail those who were responsible for my husband's murder. Unfortunately, the president is still enjoying his freedom, former president. But I received the partial justice.
Raman, you report about another area of the world. You wrote about the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. What's it like to report there now?
It's still difficult. At some extent, you can say the media is free in Pakistan. They have hundreds of news channels, newspapers, websites, blogs, and multiple things like that, journalists working with them. But at the other hand, they are not free. There are many people who don't like a free media. For example, military, for example, religious leaders, for example, government politicians. Recently, multiple journalists were abducted. Their blogs were shut down. News channels were shut down in various cities, like big news channels in Pakistan. Recently, the Freedom Network has reported that 157 cases were reported only in 2017. Most of them were in capital city of Pakistan. So it's still difficult there to work.
The ones that are arrested, what happens to them?
We don't know that.
You have no idea what happens to them?
What happened to them? Salim Shehzad was arrested. Later on, we found his body. Multiple journalists were killed on the spot, like in Swat Valley, while there was Taliban. Multiple were detained, but people don't know where were they. They were released, and people believe that army have been took them.
What would help? And what can the American media do to sort of help the journalists in that area? Is it putting the spotlight on it constantly about the different challenges that the journalists meet?
I don't know. Association of Television Journalists in Pakistan, CPJ, Freedom Network, Reporter Without Borders, they are talking to Pakistani government. They are raising the issue in American media and international level. But the situation is still there. The situation is the same.
It doesn't get any better, does it? It just gets rougher. At least we hear these stories about people being kidnapped, as you just said.
When I was working there in 2009, my home was leveled by Taliban, and I came here. And in those days, the situation was kind of better. But now, 157 reports were reported in just only 1 year. 5 of them were killed.
So it's the threat of what happened to you that has you here in the United States?
Exactly.
The fear. Anyway, Raman, thank you. Let me go to you, Leo. Leo, you report on Venezuela. You report from Miami. What's the status of reporting in Venezuela these days?
Well, in Venezuela, most of the free media are closed. Most of media change their editorial to fashion, to soap opera.
Because they're afraid to report on the news?
Yeah, because we have the government or the regime of Nicolas Maduro control all the state, control the army, they have the political police, and they used to treat the medias. They put on the medias multimillionaire fines that are impossible to pay. So they have 19 years controlling the medias, and today is really difficult, actually. Just 2 medias are broadcasting live in Venezuela, free, that are the media BPI, where that is our media, because our servers are here in the United States. But we have in Venezuela 34 journalists around the country trying to say the truth through a phone, because if we use a camera, will be really difficult. Our reporters are being jailed.
What happens if you report the news? What if you're a journalist in Venezuela and you report the news? Not the culture, not the fashion, not the music, but you report the news and let's say even report something on the government.
Well, we have an illegal National Assembly, Constituent National Assembly, that last month they launched a law that the name is Law Against the Hate. And if you say something against them, they consider that this is hate. So you could be arrested. For example, last year, our cameraman was put in prison while he was broadcasting a protest. And this did happen live. And one a person of the army tried to put a tear gas in the mouth of one of our reporters live, broadcasting live. So I see in Venezuela what happened is we have a criminal organization that take the control of the state and control the army and control all the powers. It's a dictator. That's what happened.
Miroslav, what's it like now in Ukraine reporting? I mean, is it getting any better, or is it still as bad as when you left?
No, actually, Ukrainian media are completely free, but we have to say they're free, but they are not independent, because majority of the media is controlled by oligarchs who are using media as a tool for their political or business purposes.
But does that mean you can report what the facts are in the news are when you say they're free? So
we can report a lot of facts, but a lot of infotainment, a lot of too much information, and it's hard for people to understand, because, as I said, every TV stations or every radio station have some kind of owner who dictate the policy of the TV stations and use it as a tool. So this is difficult. That's why we at VOA so valuable for the country, because from 10 Ukrainians, 9 from 10 Ukrainians say that they trust Voice of America, because Ukrainians are looking for truth, are looking for objective information, and that's what we can provide them.
Raman, you report obviously for VOA. Is well received in the Pakistan-Afghanistan area?
Yes, it is. And I would like to say one more thing. In Pakistan, I talk to multiple journalists every day, reporters, analysts. They're using a term self-censorship nowadays, which is very popular. So I said, why are you using this term? They said, because we are covering political gatherings, but we are not allowed to say whatever we report from the area. I said, why? Because they said the television channels will be stopped receiving commercials from the companies. So who are stopping them to give the commercials? Army, military. So it is like the VOA, as she said, is also popular in Pakistan, particularly in the FATA region, which is the most volatile region in Pakistan. Taliban's are there, militants are there, Pakistani army having military operations there. So yes, those kind of.
You know, I appreciate all of you joining us. I don't think that even American journalists have a full understanding of what journalism from different regions of the world go through. I mean, we are very fortunate at the First Amendment. I mean, the freedom of press, everything's not perfect here. I'm not suggesting that, but when you hear the magnitude of the stories of how difficult it is for all of you to get the news out.
I just want to say that I completely agree with your point when you raised that American journalists should speak more about. We should support each other.
And it doesn't cost a dime. They can do it on social media. They can do it on their own. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go, VOA pays tribute to Ali Noor Syed, a freelance cameraman in Somalia. Ali was working for VOA in Mogadishu on October 14, 2017, interviewing Somalia's justice minister about an education program for prisoners. As he was preparing the interview for air, Ali realized he left his laptop charger in the car. When he went to get it, a bomb went off. Ali was killed, along with 300 others, in Somalia's deadliest terror attack. Ali Noor Syed was only 31 years old. He survived by his pregnant wife and 2 children, ages 4 and 1. We remember him and our colleagues recently killed in Afghanistan.